Red and blue lights violently strobed across the pristine walls of the upscale suburban garage, casting long, erratic shadows. A black woman stood beside her luxury SUV, cornered by two aggressive police officers whose hands hovered dangerously over their holstered weapons. They believed they had caught a brazen burglar red-handed in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Maryland. They demanded her identification, eager to make an arrest. Instead, the golden embossed federal credentials she handed them would freeze the blood in their veins and dismantle their entire precinct. Rain lashed against the windshield in steady, rhythmic sheets, turning the winding tree-lined roads into a slick, black mirror. For Maya Sinclair, the heavy weather was merely background noise to the exhaustion sinking into her bones. She was at the absolute pinnacle of her career. As a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, her days were spent in windowless conference rooms in Washington, D.C., dismantling systemic corruption, unsealing federal indictments, and holding massive municipal institutions accountable. She had just spent a long, grueling day locked in tense negotiations regarding a massive consent decree involving a major East Coast police department. Her mind was a tangled web of constitutional law, civil rights statutes, and the sheer administrative fatigue that came with being a high-ranking federal prosecutor. All she wanted was a hot shower, a glass of Cabernet, and her bed. She signaled left, the quiet ticking of the blinker, the only sound in the insulated cabin, and turned onto the quiet street. It was an exclusive enclave, a neighborhood of sprawling stone colonials, manicured lawns, and silent, winding cul-de-sacs. Homes here easily cleared the multi-million mark. She had purchased hers some time ago, a testament to decades of grueling academic excellence at Harvard Law and relentless litigation work. It was her sanctuary. But sanctuaries, as Maya well knew from her line of work, were often fragile illusions. 2 houses down, the heavy velvet curtains of a living room window twitched. Eleanor Whitfield, a widow who served as the self-appointed neighborhood watch captain, stood in the dark. She had a long documented history of calling the local dispatch for suspicious activity, which, more often than not, simply meant anyone who didn't fit her narrow, antiquated view of who belonged in the neighborhood. Through the rain, Eleanor saw the dark SUV pull into the Sinclair residence. She had never bothered to meet Maya, despite her having lived there for some time. In Eleanor's mind, the homeowner was usually a white corporate executive who traveled often. Seeing a black silhouette behind the wheel of a luxury vehicle pulling up to the dark, silent house was all the confirmation she needed. She picked up her cell phone and dialed 911, her voice hushed and panicked. "Yes, police? There is a vehicle pulling into the driveway. The owner is out of town. I think someone is breaking in. Please hurry. They look dangerous." Ignorant to the invisible machinery of racial profiling already spinning into motion, Maya pressed the button on her sun visor. The heavy garage door groaned and began its slow ascent, revealing the brightly lit, immaculate interior. She eased the SUV inside, put the car in park, and let out a long, shuddering sigh. The engine cut off, leaving a ringing silence in her ears. She pressed the button to close the garage door and leaned over to gather her briefcase. A heavy leather satchel containing classified DOJ files, her federal badge, and her laptop. As the garage door began its slow descent, the blaring, unmistakable wail of a police siren shattered the quiet of the neighborhood. Maya's head snapped up. Through the rearview mirror, she saw the blinding flash of red and blue strobes reflecting off the wet pavement of her driveway. The descending garage door suddenly jerked, stopped, and reversed. Someone had broken the safety sensor beam at the base of the tracks. Footsteps slapped heavily against the wet concrete. Before Maya could even unbuckle her seatbelt, a maglite beam violently pierced the tinted driver's side window, blinding her. Someone was hammering on the glass with the butt of a flashlight. The strikes so forceful she feared the glass would shatter inward and spray her face. "Police, shut the engine off and show me your hands! Do it now!" A voice roared from the other side of the glass. Maya froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a primal response to sudden, aggressive danger. But within a fraction of a second, the seasoned prosecutor in her took over. The adrenaline was suppressed, replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly calm hyper-awareness. She knew the statistics, she knew the case files, she knew exactly how quickly a misunderstanding in a dark garage could turn into a fatal tragedy. Slowly, deliberately, she raised both hands to eye level, palms open and facing the window. My engine is off, she said, though she knew they likely couldn't hear her over the rain and their own shouting. Open the door. Step out of the vehicle with your hands up. If you reach for anything, you will be shot. There were two of them. She could see their silhouettes against the flashing cruiser lights. One was at her door, the other flanking the passenger side, hands resting ominously on their duty belts. Maya took a deep breath. She didn't reach for her purse. She didn't reach for her cell phone. Using only her left hand, moving at a glacial pace, she unlatched the door and pushed it open. The damp, frigid air rushed into the warm cabin of the SUV, accompanied by the aggressive, booming voice of Officer Harlan Crow. He was a veteran of the force, a man whose personnel file, though Maya didn't know it yet, was littered with excessive force complaints and administrative warnings that had miraculously never resulted in termination. His partner, Officer Nolan Pierce, a rookie with only a short time on the street, stood rigidly on the passenger side, mirroring his senior officer's aggressive posture. "Step out. Keep those hands where I can see them," Crow barked, his hand unclasping the retention strap on his holster. "I am stepping out," Maya said, her voice remarkably steady. Her tone wasn't just calm. It was authoritative, laced with the icy diction of a woman accustomed to controlling federal courtrooms. She placed one heel on the concrete, then the other, rising to her full height. She was dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, a stark contrast to the typical attire of a midnight burglar. "Turn around and face the vehicle. Do not move," Crow commanded. He stepped forward, closing the distance, his flashlight still trained directly on her face, blinding her. Maya did not turn around. She stood her ground, her hands raised just above her shoulders. "Officers, you are on my private property. I live here. This is my vehicle, and this is my home. You have broken the plane of my garage without a warrant or probable cause. I suggest you lower your voices and tell me exactly why you are trespassing." Crow paused for a fraction of a second, clearly thrown off by her vocabulary and complete lack of fear. But his ego, heavily fortified by the badge on his chest, quickly recovered. He took another step forward, his jaw tight. "Listen to me very carefully," Crow sneered, pointing a thick finger at her. "We got a call about a burglary in progress. You pull into a dark house in a luxury car in this neighborhood? You don't live here. Now turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car before I put you on the concrete myself." Maya's eyes narrowed. The blatant, thinly veiled racism hung in the air like a foul odor. "You don't live here." It was the same tired assumption, the same prejudiced calculus that led to the very civil rights investigations she spearheaded on a daily basis. "I am not placing my hands on my vehicle, and I am not turning around," Maya stated, her voice dropping an octave, radiating absolute authority. "I am the lawful owner of this residence. My name is Maya Sinclair. I have committed no crime, nor are there any articulable facts to support a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. By ordering me to submit to a physical search in my own home, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights under the Constitution. Now, take your hand off your weapon, officer." Officer Pierce, the rookie on the passenger side, shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at Crow. The woman didn't sound like a car thief. She sounded like a judge. But Crow was seeing red. His authority had been challenged by someone he had already mentally categorized as a suspect. "I'm not going to tell you again," Crow shouted, pulling his handcuffs from his belt with a metallic clatter. "You are being detained for suspicion of burglary and grand theft auto. You're going in cuffs until we figure out who you really are. If you place those handcuffs on me, officer, you will be initiating a false arrest and an unlawful detention under the color of law," Maya warned, her gaze locking directly onto Crow's eyes. She didn't flinch. "I strongly advise you to de-escalate. Ask for my identification. Do your job properly, or I promise you the legal consequences will be catastrophic for you." Crow laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You're going to lecture me on the law, lady. You people always have a script. I know my rights. I know the law. Save it for the public defender." He reached out, grabbing her left wrist with a heavy, forceful grip, attempting to twist her arm behind her back. Maya did not resist physically, but she didn't yield either. "Oh, yeah." She locked her elbow, standing firm. "Officer Crow." She read his nameplate under the glare of the garage lights. "I am going to reach into my jacket pocket. I am going to pull out my wallet. It contains my driver's license, which shows this exact address. It also contains something else that you need to look at very closely. You reach into your jacket, and we're going to have a serious problem, Pierce yelled from the other side, drawing his taser and pointing the red laser dot directly at Maya's chest. I am moving at a fraction of normal speed, Maya said calmly, maintaining eye contact with Crow, ignoring the laser dancing on her suit jacket. My right hand is moving to my left breast pocket. I am retrieving my wallet. Nothing else. Crow, perhaps slightly unnerved by her sheer, mechanical calmness, didn't tackle her. He kept his grip on her left wrist, but watched as she slowly slid 2 fingers into her tailored jacket. She extracted a sleek, black leather trifold wallet. Open it, Crow demanded, and hand me the ID. No sudden moves. Maya flipped the wallet open. On the right side, tucked behind a clear plastic window, was her driver's license. But she didn't hand him the license first. With her thumb, she flipped the center leather flap downward. Pinned to the heavy leather was a solid gold, gleaming badge featuring the Great Seal of the United States. Beneath it, a secure federal holographic identification card bore her photograph. The bold, unmissable black text across the top of the card read, United States Department of Justice. Beneath her name, her title was printed in crisp lettering, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division. Maya extended her right hand, holding the open wallet inches from Crow's face. Read it, she commanded softly. It wasn't a request. It was an order from an apex predator of the legal system. Read it out loud, Officer Crow. The garage was suddenly deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain outside and the static crackle of the police radio on Crow's shoulder. Crow leaned in, his eyes squinting against the glare of the overhead garage lights. He looked at the gold badge. His eyes darted down to the holographic DOJ credentials. He blinked, his brain struggling to process the impossible reality in front of him. The woman he was manhandling. The woman he had just accused of being a common car thief and threatened to throw onto the concrete was one of the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officials in the country. Department of... Crow started, his voice suddenly sounding dry and raspy. He swallowed hard. The belligerent confidence that had puffed out his chest just seconds prior completely evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sickening dread. Justice. Keep reading, Maya said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. Read the title, Deputy. Assistant Attorney General, Crow mumbled. His hand, which had been gripping Maya's wrist with bruising force, suddenly sprang open as if he had touched a hot stove. He took a hasty step backward, nearly tripping over his own boots. Officer Pierce, who still had his taser drawn and pointed at Maya's chest, saw the blood drain entirely from his senior partner's face. Crow, what is it? Is it a fake? Put the taser away, Pierce, Crow snapped, his voice trembling slightly. Put it away right now. Pierce lowered the weapon, confusion washing over his young face as he holstered it. Maya slowly lowered her arms. She adjusted her jacket cuffs, deliberately smoothing out the wrinkles where Crow had grabbed her. She slipped her wallet back into her pocket. The dynamic in the garage had flipped so violently and completely that the air pressure itself seemed to have changed. Now, Maya said, taking a deliberate step toward Crow. The officer instinctively retreated. Let us review exactly what occurred here tonight. You bypassed the perimeter of my property without a warrant. You initiated an investigatory stop without reasonable, articulable suspicion, relying entirely on a biased assumption fed to you by a dispatcher or a neighbor. You threatened me with lethal force. You threatened me with physical violence. You unlawfully detained me. And when I attempted to inform you of my legal residency, you told me, and I quote, you people always have a script. Oh, sorry, Crow opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man standing on the trap door of a gallows. I want your supervisor here, now, Maya demanded. Ma'am, listen. We received a 911 call about a possible B&E in progress, Crow stammered, desperately trying to construct a defense. We were just doing our duty to protect the neighborhood. It was dark. You fit the description. I fit the description of what, Officer Crow? Maya cut him off, her tone razor sharp. A homeowner in a business suit, a woman driving her own vehicle into her own garage, or did I simply fit the description of someone who doesn't look like they belong in this neighborhood? Do not insult my intelligence. Call your watch commander immediately. Pierce, realizing the magnitude of the disaster, reached for his radio. Dispatch, request a supervisor to the residence. Code 4 on the suspect. It's a misunderstanding. It is not a misunderstanding. Maya corrected him sharply. It is a civil rights violation under Title 18, deprivation of rights under color of law. And you, Officer Pierce, just pointed a conductive electrical weapon at a federal prosecutor. Pierce went pale. He looked at Crow for support, but Crow was staring at the floor, his career flashing before his eyes. Within minutes, a police SUV screeched to a halt at the edge of the driveway. Sergeant Malcolm Voss, a seasoned veteran with decades of experience, jogged up the driveway through the rain. He took one look at his two officers standing like reprimanded schoolchildren, then looked at the elegant, furious woman standing by the SUV. "Officers, what is going on here?" Voss asked, his eyes darting between them. Maya didn't let them answer. She stepped forward and extended her hand, though not to shake. She flipped open her wallet again. "Sergeant Voss, my name is Maya Sinclair. I am a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. Voss looked at the badge, and a look of absolute horror washed over his face. He knew exactly who she was. The name Maya Sinclair was infamous in police departments nationwide. She was the architect behind multiple federal consent decrees that had gutted and restructured corrupt police forces across the country. But what Sergeant Voss knew, and what made his stomach churn with absolute terror, was a secret that hadn't yet been released to the public. The DOJ had recently opened a preliminary quiet inquiry into the local police department regarding a statistically impossible disparity in traffic stops and use of force against minorities in affluent neighborhoods. Maya Sinclair wasn't just a federal prosecutor. She was the exact federal prosecutor who was currently building a massive federal case against their specific department. "Ms. Sinclair," Sergeant Voss said, his voice instantly deferential, stripping away all police bravado. "I am incredibly sorry. There has clearly been a massive breakdown in protocol here. We received a call from a neighbor." "A neighbor's racist paranoia does not override the Fourth Amendment, Sergeant," Maya said coldly. "Your officers bypassed basic investigative procedures. They resorted immediately to threats of violence. Officer Crow here physically assaulted me, while Officer Pierce held me at gunpoint with a taser." "She's honestly." "Assaulted?" Voss whipped his head around to glare at Crow. "You put your hands on her?" "I was securing the scene," Crow pleaded weakly. "She wouldn't put her hands on the car because she was under no legal obligation to do so," Maya fired back. She pulled out her smartphone and tapped the screen. "Furthermore, Sergeant Voss, you should know that my home is equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. Everything that happened in this garage, from the moment your officers broke the sensor beam, has been recorded in high-definition video and audio. It has already been uploaded to a secure cloud server." Crow's knees actually buckled slightly. He reached out to steady himself against the side of the police cruiser. It was over. He knew it was over. "Ms. Sinclair, what can we do to make this right?" Voss asked, his tone now a desperate plea for damage control. He knew that if this video reached the media, or worse, the Attorney General's desk, the department would be burned to the ground. Maya looked at the three men. She thought about all the case files on her desk. She thought about the thousands of people who didn't have gold badges to pull out of their pockets when the police treated them like criminals in their own neighborhoods. People who ended up handcuffed, beaten, or worse, simply for existing in spaces where someone else decided they didn't belong. She smiled, but it was a cold, predatory expression. "Make it right?" Maya echoed, her eyes gleaming with the full, crushing weight of the federal government. "Sergeant Voss, you don't have the authority to make this right, but I do." Sergeant Malcolm Voss stood in the pouring rain, watching the taillights of Maya Sinclair's luxury SUV flash as she finally pulled the vehicle fully into the garage. The heavy garage door descended with a loud final thud, effectively slamming shut on the careers of the two officers standing frozen on the driveway. Voss turned to Crow and Pierce. The rookie, Pierce, was hyperventilating, his hands planted on his knees as if he were going to be sick on the manicured lawn. Crow simply stared into the middle distance, the color completely drained from his face. "Get in the cruisers," Voss ordered, his voice devoid of any camaraderie. "Return to the precinct. Turn in your badges, your weapons, and your body cameras to the desk sergeant. You are both suspended pending an immediate internal affairs investigation. Do not speak to each other. Do not speak to the union rep until I say so. Move." Inside her home, the adrenaline finally crashed. Maya locked the door, leading from the garage into her mudroom, leaned against the heavy oak wood, and let out a long, shaky breath. Her hands, which had been steady as stone while staring down the barrel of a taser, were now trembling uncontrollably. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment to process the raw human terror of what had just occurred. She knew how easily Crow could have pulled the trigger. She knew how quickly a misunderstanding could have turned into a press conference where police spokesmen discussed her sudden movements or aggressive posture. But she had survived, and now the predator was awake. Maya walked into her kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and immediately opened her encrypted federal laptop. She bypassed her usual sleep schedule and logged directly into the DOJ's secure servers. She accessed her home security system's cloud storage, downloading the multiple angles of the garage confrontation in high-definition video and crisp audio. Next, she drafted an emergency email to her direct superior, Elias Thornton, the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division. She attached the video files and wrote a brief, clinical summary of the encounter. But Maya wasn't just building a case about her own assault. Her brilliant, analytical mind had already connected a terrifying dot. For the past several months, Maya had been leading a covert, preliminary inquiry into the local police department based on a whistleblower tip. A confidential informant from within the precinct had alleged that a specific group of veteran officers had a long-standing history of using excessive force against minorities during traffic stops and field interviews, and that the department's Internal Affairs Division was actively shredding the complaints. The whistleblower had provided badge numbers but no names. Maya opened her encrypted case file and cross-referenced the badge numbers the informant had flagged. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled down the spreadsheet. There it was. Badge number matching Officer Harlan Crow. Crow wasn't just a bad apple who had made a mistake in her garage. He was the linchpin of the exact federal corruption investigation she had been quietly building. By assaulting a deputy assistant attorney general, Crow hadn't just broken the law, he had handed the Department of Justice the golden key to tear his entire department apart. Early the next morning, the polished oak doors of Chief Victor Langston's office at police headquarters swung violently open. Sergeant Voss stood in the doorway clutching a manila folder, looking like he hadn't slept. "Chief, we have a catastrophic situation," Voss said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Chief Langston, a politician in a uniform who cared more about his public image than his officers, looked up from his coffee. "What is it, Malcolm?" Voss walked over, opened the folder, and placed a printed still frame from Officer Pierce's body camera on the desk. It showed Maya Sinclair standing in her tailored suit, holding open her wallet to display the gold DOJ badge. Last night, Crow and Pierce responded to a 911 call from Eleanor Whitfield in the neighborhood. Voss explained grimly. They initiated a felony stop on a homeowner pulling into her own garage. Crow went hands-on. Pierce drew his taser. They didn't ask for ID until they had already threatened lethal force. Langston frowned. A bad stop will put them on desk duty, issue an apology, maybe a small settlement if she sues. "Chief, you aren't listening," Voss interrupted, tapping a heavy finger on the photograph. "Look at the ID. The homeowner is Maya Sinclair. She is the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. She's the woman who just gutted other major police departments with federal consent decrees, and she has the entire encounter on high-definition home security footage." Langston's coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor and splashing dark liquid across his polished shoes. He stared at the gold badge in the photograph, his breathing suddenly shallow. "Oh my God," Langston whispered. "It gets worse," Voss said quietly. "I ran the dispatch logs this morning. The 911 caller, Eleanor Whitfield. I looked at her file. Do you know who she is?" Langston shook his head, dread pooling in his stomach. "She is Deputy Chief Warren Whitfield's sister-in-law," Voss revealed. And according to the CAD notes, dispatch tried to clear the call as a low-priority suspicious vehicle because the license plate matched the registered homeowner, but the call was manually overridden and upgraded to a burglary in progress by a watch commander. Langston felt the room spin. The 911 call hadn't been a mistake. It had been intentionally escalated by someone in his own command staff as a favor to a paranoid relative. And they had unleashed their most aggressive officers on a high-ranking federal prosecutor. "Get Raymond Becker on the phone," Langston ordered, his voice trembling as he reached for a towel to wipe up the spilled coffee. "We need the union involved immediately. We have to bury this before she takes it to a grand jury." By mid-afternoon, a tense, suffocating silence filled the conference room on the 5th floor of the federal courthouse in downtown Washington, D.C. Chief Victor Langston sat at the long mahogany table, sweating through his uniform shirt. Next to him sat Raymond Becker, the belligerent president of the police union, a man who had built his career on aggressively defending bad cops through technicalities, media spin, and political bullying. Across the table sat Maya Sinclair. She looked immaculate, wearing a sharp navy blue blazer, her face an unreadable mask of professional detachment. Beside her sat Elias Thornton, the assistant attorney general, looking over a pair of reading glasses with the terrifying calm of a judge about to hand down a life sentence. "Listen, Maya, Ms. Sinclair," Raymond Becker began, leaning forward and resting his thick forearms on the table. He attempted to use his signature mix of folksy charm and subtle intimidation. "We all agree that last night was a regrettable misunderstanding. It was dark, raining, and the officers were acting on dispatched information regarding a potential felony. They were operating under high stress." Maya didn't blink. "Raymond, do not insult me. I have prosecuted cartels and corrupt politicians. Your folksy union rhetoric will not work here. Officer Crow did not make a mistake. He executed a racially motivated, unconstitutional seizure and escalated to physical violence because his ego was bruised when a black woman did not immediately cower." Becker's face flushed. "Now, hold on a minute. Crow has a family. He's a decorated officer. We are prepared to offer a formal, written apology from the department. We will agree to a suspension for Crow and mandatory de-escalation training for Pierce. In exchange, we ask that the DOJ declines to file formal civil rights charges and we keep this out of the press." Elias Thornton chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. He slid a thick black binder across the table toward Chief Langston. "Mr. Becker," Elias said softly, "you seem to be under the delusion that this is a negotiation. It is not. Open the binder, Chief." Langston's trembling hands flipped the binder open. Inside were hundreds of pages of internal emails, whistleblower testimony, and dispatch logs. "This morning, we subpoenaed the unedited audio of the 911 call placed by Eleanor Whitfield," Maya stated, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "Mrs. Whitfield did not report a burglary. On the unredacted tape, she specifically tells the dispatcher, 'That woman who bought the old Miller house is pulling into the garage, and I don't like the look of her. Send a cruiser to scare her off.'" Chief Langston squeezed his eyes shut. "Mrs. Whitfield knew exactly who I was," Maya continued. "She knew I owned the home. She weaponized the police department to harass me. But what elevates this from a local nuisance to a federal conspiracy is what happened next. The dispatcher logged it as a non-emergency. But minutes later, Deputy Chief Warren Whitfield, Eleanor's brother-in-law, logged into the computer-aided dispatch system from his home computer and manually upgraded the call to a priority 1 felony in progress, deliberately bypassing patrol units and dispatching Crow. Raymond Becker's jaw went slack. He looked at Langston. "Is that true, Victor?" Langston didn't answer. He just stared at the binder in horror. "Why Crow?" Maya asked rhetorically, leaning forward. "Why did Deputy Chief Whitfield specifically dispatch Officer Harlan Crow to handle a favor for his sister-in-law? We wondered about that. So we looked into Crow's sealed internal affairs file, the one you, Mr. Becker, fought so hard to keep hidden." Maya reached into her own briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table. "Badge number matching Officer Crow," she read aloud. "Officer Crow has multiple sustained complaints of excessive force against minority drivers in recent years, and in every single instance, the reviewing officer who cleared him of wrongdoing and buried the complaint was Deputy Chief Warren Whitfield. They are running a protection racket." The room was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. Becker slumped back in his chair, his aggressive posturing completely shattered. He realized with horrifying clarity that he wasn't here to negotiate a suspension. He was here to attend the funeral of his police department. "You didn't just assault a federal prosecutor, Chief Langston," Elias Thornton said coldly. "Your department handed us the definitive proof of a systemic top-down conspiracy to violate the civil rights of local residents under the color of law." Maya stood up, buttoning her blazer. She looked down at the two men, her eyes burning with a righteous, icy fire. "Here are my terms," Maya dictated, her voice echoing with absolute finality. "By the end of the day, Officer Crow and Deputy Chief Whitfield will be stripped of their police powers and terminated. Tomorrow morning, they will both be indicted by a federal grand jury for deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice. Officer Pierce will resign immediately and agree to testify against them in exchange for immunity." Becker opened his mouth, trying to salvage something. Anything. And the department? Maya leaned over the table, planting her hands flat on the mahogany surface, bringing her face inches from Chief Langston's. "As for the department, Chief," Maya whispered, "the United States Department of Justice is placing this county under a federal consent decree. We are taking over your internal affairs division, your hiring protocols, and your use of force review boards. I will be auditing every single arrest your officers have made in recent years. If you attempt to block me, delete a single email, or fight this in court, I will personally see to it that you face federal RICO charges. She stood back up, picked up her briefcase, and looked at Elias. "We are done here." The heavy doors of the federal courthouse clicked shut, sealing Chief Victor Langston and Union President Raymond Becker in the marble hallway. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The air conditioning in the corridor was freezing, yet sweat poured down Langston's neck, soaking the stiff collar of his uniform. The absolute, uncompromising reality of Maya Sinclair's ultimatum hung over them like a guillotine. "Victor, listen to me," Becker finally hissed, grabbing the police chief by the elbow and dragging him toward the elevators. "She's bluffing. The DOJ does not move this fast. She's angry. She's flexing her federal muscle, but she cannot legally dismantle an entire police department in a day without a judge signing off. We fight this. We go to the press, we spin it as a misunderstanding, and we get the mayor on the phone." Langston looked at the union boss with hollow eyes. "Raymond, did you not just read that file? They have Warren Whitfield dead to rights. They have his IP address on the CAD override. They have multiple buried complaints on Crow. If we fight this, she's going to indict me for RICO." "Only if they have time to build the case," Becker countered desperately as the elevator doors chimed open. "You call Mayor Donovan Hale right now. Hale owes his entire re-election campaign to our police union endorsement. You tell him to call his contacts in the Senate. We put political pressure on the Attorney General to rein in this rogue prosecutor before she destroys the county." Desperation is a powerful hallucinogen, and Langston took the dose. Sitting in the back of his chauffeured police cruiser, he dialed Mayor Donovan Hale. Hale, a shrewd, image-obsessed politician, listened to the frantic explanation with growing horror. However, calculating that losing the police union's backing would spell his political doom, the mayor agreed to intervene. "Sit tight, Victor," Hale promised smoothly over the phone. "I'm going to make a call to Senator Everett Klein's office. We'll get a lid on this. Sinclair is a deputy assistant. She still has bosses. Nobody wants a federal scandal during an election year." What neither Chief Langston, Raymond Becker, nor Mayor Donovan Hale realized was that Maya Sinclair did not play politics. She played the law, and she was several steps ahead of them. Later that afternoon, an hour before Maya's deadline, Mayor Donovan Hale sat in his spacious City Hall office waiting for a return call from the senator. Instead, his private line rang. The caller ID read, "Department of Justice, Office of the Attorney General." Hale cleared his throat and answered, expecting to negotiate a political compromise. "Mayor Hale speaking." "Mayor Hale, this is Elias Thornton, Assistant Attorney General," the voice on the other end said. It was cold, flat, and entirely devoid of political warmth. "I am calling to issue a formal courtesy notification. We are aware you have been making inquiries regarding an active federal civil rights investigation being spearheaded by Deputy Assistant Sinclair." "Well, Elias, I was just trying to facilitate a smoother—" "Do not speak, Mayor," Thornton interrupted sharply, his voice cracking like a whip. "Listen. If you make one more phone call, if you send one more email, or if you take one single action to interfere with or obstruct this investigation, I will personally draft an indictment charging you with federal obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Do you understand me? You will be frog-marched out of City Hall in handcuffs before the evening news." Hale's blood ran ice cold. The phone slipped slightly in his sweaty grip. I understand, Mr. Thornton. Good. Have a pleasant afternoon. The line went dead. Hale immediately dialed Chief Langston. When Langston answered, the mayor spoke only 3 words before hanging up for good. You're on your own. By the deadline, it passed. Chief Langston, paralyzed by fear and completely abandoned by his political allies, failed to terminate Crow and Whitfield. He couldn't bring himself to sign the paperwork, hoping against hope that more time would buy them safety. It was the final, fatal miscalculation. Early the next morning, the quiet, affluent suburb was shattered by the roaring engines of armored FBI vehicles. They swarmed the sprawling gated property of Deputy Chief Warren Whitfield. Inside his master bathroom, Whitfield was standing over the toilet in his silk pajamas, frantically trying to smash a cryptographic hard drive with a hammer before flushing the magnetic disks. He had been tipped off by a sympathetic dispatcher that federal warrants were being processed. He never got the chance to destroy the evidence. The heavy front door of his mansion exploded inward under the force of a battering ram. Flashbang grenades detonated in the grand foyer, blowing out the imported stained glass windows and filling the house with blinding light and deafening thunder. FBI, federal agents, show me your hands. A team of heavily armed tactical agents flooded up the curved staircase. They breached the master suite, finding Whitfield covered in sweat and pulverized plastic shards. Within seconds, the deputy chief of police was thrown face first onto his expensive rug, his hands violently zipped behind his back. Simultaneously across town in a modest apartment, Officer Harlan Crow was awakened not by his alarm clock, but by the barrel of a rifle pressing against his cheek. Crow had fallen asleep on his couch, an empty bottle on the coffee table. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. As the federal agents hauled him to his feet in his undershirt and boxer shorts, Crow began to weep uncontrollably, the crushing weight of his destroyed life finally breaking him. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. had been transformed into an impenetrable fortress of media satellite trucks, flashing camera bulbs, and screaming reporters. The scandal had broken nationwide with the force of a hurricane. The explosive story of a rogue, racially motivated police unit attempting to terrorize a high-ranking black DOJ attorney only to trigger a massive federal takedown of their own department was dominating the headlines of every major news network. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense, the air thick with the gravity of federal prosecution. Judge Preston Aldridge, a no-nonsense jurist with years on the federal bench and zero tolerance for institutional corruption, presided over the arraignment. His gavel struck the heavy wooden block with a sharp, echoing crack that silenced the murmuring gallery. Officer Nolan Pierce had resigned exactly as Maya had demanded. The young rookie, terrified by the prospect of a federal cage, had taken a sweeping immunity deal. He sat in the witness box and testified in detail, describing not only the harrowing incident in Maya's garage, but multiple other traffic stops where Officer Harlan Crow had ordered him to falsify reports, plan evidence, or intentionally escalate situations with minority drivers. Crow, completely broken, sat at the defense table wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. The aggressive, chest-puffing bravado he had displayed while gripping Maya's wrist in the dark was entirely gone. He looked small, hollowed out, and violently trembling. He had tried, through his desperate defense attorney, to secure a last-minute plea deal, but Maya Sinclair, seated with immaculate posture at the prosecution table in a tailored black suit, refused to offer him even an inch of leniency. The United States seeks the absolute maximum penalty under the relevant federal statute, Your Honor, Maya stated clearly, her voice echoing off the mahogany-paneled walls. She stood before the judge, a paragon of unrelenting legal authority. Officer Crow did not just violate the rights of a single citizen on a rainy night. He acted as the militant enforcer for a systemic, localized criminal enterprise operating behind a police badge. He relied on the color of law to intimidate, assault, and falsely imprison the vulnerable residents of this county. To offer a plea deal would be an insult to the Constitution he swore to uphold. Judge Aldridge nodded slowly, his piercing gaze shifting to the defense table. Crow stared at the floor, weeping silently. Realizing a trial would only expose him to a harsher sentence, Crow pleaded guilty to all charges. Judge Aldridge showed no mercy, sentencing the disgraced officer to a lengthy term in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. But the most satisfying twist of the sprawling legal proceedings was yet to come. While the national media focused intently on the corrupt cops and the crumbling command staff, Maya had absolutely not forgotten the catalyst of the entire nightmare, the woman who had weaponized the police in the first place out of sheer prejudice. On a bright morning, Eleanor Whitfield was hosting an exclusive garden brunch for her neighborhood association. She was holding a crystal flute of expensive mimosas, standing on her pristine flagstone patio, complaining to her wealthy friends about the awful noise the news helicopters were making above their previously quiet neighborhood. The clinking of crystal glasses and the polite, hushed laughter were suddenly interrupted by the heavy, rhythmic marching of tactical boots. Two stern-faced FBI special agents, accompanied by a towering U.S. Marshal, stepped past the catered buffet table, ignoring the gasps of the neighborhood elite. "Eleanor Whitfield," the lead agent asked loudly, his voice cutting through the morning air, ensuring every single one of her horrified guests could hear clearly. "Yes?" Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly as she lowered her glass, a look of profound confusion washing over her perfectly powdered face. "Who are you? What is the meaning of this intrusion?" "Ma'am, you are under arrest for violation of federal law, making false statements to authorities, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights," the agent announced, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Eleanor shrieked, dropping her crystal flute. It shattered into pieces on the stone patio, the liquid pooling around her expensive designer shoes. "This is a massive mistake. My brother-in-law is the deputy chief of police. You can't do this to me. I live in this neighborhood. Do you know who I am?" "Your brother-in-law is currently sitting in federal custody without bail, Mrs. Whitfield." "And so are you," the agent replied coldly, clamping the cuffs tightly around her wrists and locking them with a sharp click. As she was marched out of her own backyard, sobbing hysterically in front of her country club friends, Eleanor finally understood the crushing reality that her privilege was not an impenetrable shield against federal law. The dominoes continued to fall with staggering speed. Deputy Chief Warren Whitfield, faced with Pierce's damning testimony, Crow's guilty plea, and the decrypted hard drive the FBI forensic unit had recovered, realized he was utterly trapped. The hard drive contained an encrypted spreadsheet detailing years of suppressed internal affairs complaints, alongside horrific racist emails exchanged between the precinct's command staff. Whitfield, out of options, took a blind plea, throwing himself on the mercy of the court. Judge Aldridge, visibly disgusted by the betrayal of public trust, sentenced the former deputy chief to a lengthy term in federal prison. Chief Victor Langston, while not directly implicated in the cover-up, was utterly disgraced by his failure to lead. Under immense pressure from a terrified Mayor Donovan Hale, who was desperately trying to avoid a federal obstruction charge himself, and the relentless national media, Langston submitted his immediate, unconditional resignation. He lost his lucrative pension and faded into complete shameful obscurity. In the months that followed the terrifying rainy night in her garage, Maya Sinclair stood at a podium in the grand briefing room of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Behind her stood Assistant Attorney General Elias Thornton and the newly appointed federally mandated civilian monitor for the police department. Camera shutters fired like machine guns as Maya approached the cluster of microphones. She looked out at the sea of eager reporters, her posture immaculate, her expression a perfect blend of solemn duty and unyielding resolve. Today, the United States Department of Justice has officially signed a comprehensive consent decree with the county, Maya announced, her powerful voice echoing clearly across the live broadcast networks. This binding federal order will completely strip away the rotting infrastructure of a police department that forgot its most sacred oath to the public. We are implementing mandatory independent civilian oversight. We are completely rebuilding the Internal Affairs Division from the ground up. And we are instituting zero-tolerance use of force policies that will be aggressively, relentlessly audited by this office. A senior reporter from the front row eagerly raised his hand, shouting over the din. "Ms. Sinclair, given that you were personally the victim of this department's targeted corruption and violence, does this massive victory feel like personal revenge?" Maya paused. The room fell into a breathless silence. She looked directly at the reporter, her dark eyes flashing with a profound, terrifying intellect. "Revenge is an emotional response meant to satisfy a bruised ego," Maya replied smoothly, her voice commanding the absolute attention of every person in the room. "The Department of Justice doesn't deal in revenge. We deal in the law. What happened in my garage was not an isolated incident. It was a glaring symptom of a deeply diseased system. I simply happened to be the one citizen they targeted who had the power, the resources, and the federal authority to surgically remove that disease. This is not personal revenge. This is exactly what justice looks like when a broken system is finally forcefully held accountable." That's great. That evening, Maya drove her luxury SUV back into the quiet, affluent neighborhood. The sky was crystal clear, painted with the brilliant colors of a descending sunset. She turned onto her street, her tires gliding smoothly over the pavement. There were no twitching velvet curtains at Eleanor Whitfield's dark, empty house down the block. There were no aggressive police cruisers waiting in the shadows to enforce an unwritten, prejudiced boundary. There was only the peaceful, hard-earned silence of her sanctuary. She pressed the button on her sun visor. The heavy garage door groaned and began its slow, steady ascent, revealing the bright, immaculate interior. She pulled her vehicle inside, shifted the car into park, and turned off the engine, listening to the quiet hum of the cooling motor. As the garage door closed behind her with a heavy, secure thud blocking out the outside world, Maya Sinclair picked up her leather briefcase. She stepped out of her car and walked into her home. The predator had protected her territory. The law had decisively won. And tomorrow, there would be more files on her desk and more corrupt systems waiting to be dismantled. Thank you so much for reading this incredible story of justice, power, and accountability. If you loved seeing Maya Sinclair use the absolute might of the law to take down a corrupt system, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who loves a powerful, real-life drama where the bad guys finally get exactly what they deserve. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling, true-to-life stories. Drop a comment below telling us what your favorite twist was. See you in the next one.